The next meeting is the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management, which will be chaired by Vice Chair Linford. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's meeting of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management is being held in public session in its entirety. At this point, I ask the Board Secretary to advise those present of the composition of the committee and any commissioner recusals on the items before the committee at today's meeting.
The Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management is composed of Commissioner Linford as the committee chair, Chairman O'Toole as the committee vice chair, and Commissioners LaBarbera, Pacino, and Rosado. All committee members are present at today's meeting. There are no recusals on the JFK Airport project and planning authorizations for the replacement of the electrical substations or the year-end capital results presentation.
Thank you. I now call on our Director of Aviation, Huntley Lawrence, to present an item concerning the modernization and upgrade of electrical substations at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Huntley.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm here today to seek your approval to replace and modernize critical electrical infrastructure at JFK International Airport, specifically concerning 4 electrical substations that serve the airport. Under the proposed authorization, 2 substations would be replaced entirely with a new substation. We would also complete the modernization of a 3rd substation and perform planning work for a future project for the replacement of the 4th substation. 4 substations serve JFK, with each transmitting power to different areas and structures. The substations range in age from 40 to 60 years old, and the substations draw power from our utility provider, Con Edison, and transform voltage as appropriate to meet the needs of assets on the airport. The proposed authorization provides for the following: replacement of 2 switchgears in the central substation, which would complete the modernization of that substation. Previously, the other 4 switchgear at the substation were replaced as part of a separate project, and work would be delivered via a design bid build project. Next is development of a new substation, Bergen, to replace 2 existing substations, Bergen and Van Wyck. This includes new switchgear and construction of a new building to house the equipment, and this work would be delivered via design build. Modernization of the 4th substation, known as Farmers, is anticipated in the future following further refinement of design. Today's request is for planning for that effort. The JFK redevelopment program will include construction of new terminals and supporting infrastructure, and significant incremental electrical capacity would be delivered via a separate substation that will be constructed as part of that program, which would be authorized in the future. Today's authorization provides for investment that is necessary to accommodate the airport's current and forecast demand for power for facilities and infrastructure separate of what's required for the new terminal developments. The total project costs for the central upgrade and new Bergen substation total $177.5 million. Costs include construction and associated planning and engineering costs, as well as contingency and prorated agency expenses. The planning authorization for Farmers being requested totals $5 million, and planning for this project is expected to be completed by the 2nd quarter of 2020. The central station upgrades will be complete by the 1st quarter of 2023, with the new Bergen substation coming online later that year in the 3rd quarter. $170.8 million in funds for this project are included in the 2017 to 2026 capital plan, and offsets required for today's authorization in the amount of $6.7 million have been identified. Replacement of substations at JFK will serve to create new jobs as well as to support existing jobs. As I mentioned earlier, this will provide for JFK's electrical infrastructure to remain in a state of good repair while enhancing capacity to accommodate future demand. Commissioners, pending your questions, I ask that you advance this item to the full board for consideration.
Thank you, Huntley. May I please have a motion from a committee member who is not recused on the matter to move the item forward for consideration of the full board? May I have a second? Hearing a second. Any objections? Hearing none, the motion is passed. Next, I call on our Chief Development Officer, Derek Utter, to present the 2018 year-end capital result. Derek.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chairman, and Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I think you all know we have a 10-year, $32 billion capital plan. I want to report on our performance for 2018. Capital spending picked up considerably in 2018 versus 2017. In fact, we spent $2.9 billion last year versus $2.5 billion in 2017. And spending increased across all line departments. I'm pleased to report that for our 4 line departments that we spent 100% of the planned spending. The reason why that is important is because we set aside money, we bond against that, and we want to spend according to plan because we have the capacity to actually process projects, versus an 88% spending versus plan in 2017. Line departments achieved 71% of planned milestone dates on time versus 63% in 2017. And just to remind you, the way we think about milestone dates is we have a milestone for pre-construction, which is the end of when we award the contract, and then secondly, when we complete construction to make sure we complete projects on time. Small project performance increased by 10 percentage points, which I'll explain a little more in a moment. Aviation was the top performer at 96% of its milestones achieved. They only missed one. And TB&T received an honorable mention with 82% of milestones achieved. We have major economic impact on the region, which you all realize. 25,000 plus job years, $1.9 billion in total wages, and almost $5 billion in total economic activity. So just to give a little more color by line department, this chart shows the spending broken out by each piece. Aviation spent ahead of plan. You'll see they spent 113% of their targeted amount. And that was good spending. It was an acceleration of activity on the Newark Terminal 1 project and also continued progress on LaGuardia. TB&T spent 91% of plan, mainly due to ahead of plan spending on the George Washington Bridge Restore the George program. Path and Port had slightly lower spending versus their plans, and we'll continue to work on that performance in 2019. So where did we spend money by project? So you'll see the top 12 projects accounted for about 74% of the budget. They're listed here. The top 2 were the 2 major airport projects that are well underway, LaGuardia and Newark. I'd like to note that Newark Terminal 1 really ramped up quite a bit over the course of the year. The project spent about $101 million in the first half of the year and $263 million, so 2 to 3 fold increase during the second half of the year. In terms of on-schedule performance, on-time performance, overall, we achieved 70% on-time performance, 60 versus 64% last year. You'll see I've circled 2 line departments which really outperformed the average, and then 2 which underperformed the average. The lower than average performance in Path and Port of about 50%, we expect to improve quite a bit this coming year. There's been a lot of focus on those 2 departments as we transition from 2018 to 2019, and I expect we'll see better performance next year on those. Small projects. So you may remember this was really the impetus that started our whole effort about a year and a half ago to put a heavy focus on schedule performance. And I'm pleased to report we have some very positive results from 2018. So spending versus plan increased by 11 percentage points from 76% in 2017 to 87% in 2018. And on-time performance increased by 10 percentage points from 62% to 72%. So why do we focus on small projects? Well, these are projects that are less than $20 million because we have a lot of them. So the average project size, the median project size is about $10 million at the port. So we have hundreds of projects in play in this range. And I want to give a lot of credit to Jim Strace, our chief engineer, who created a small project task force this past year. And that team developed a series of recommendations, including streamlining internal review processes, standardizing design notes, details, and specs, and developing bid submission checklists for contractors, all of which contributed to this improved performance. Going forward, we have a dedicated staff in the engineering department who are going to focus on a portfolio of projects that are on even the smaller size of less than $2.5 million each. Last quarter, we put in place in beneficial use 14 projects. Some are in the category of state of good repair. that is the bread and butter of what we do. So rehabilitation of elevators and escalators at the bus terminal, important for customers. Priority rehabilitation of berths 58, 60, 62, and 54 at the Elizabeth Marine Terminal. We also completed two much larger projects. So LaGuardia Central Terminal Building Concourse B was opened, and the replacement and upgrade of Path's Harrison Station, the Northeast Head House, was also opened in the fourth quarter. So I mentioned that Path and Port have very detailed action plans, but I want to talk a little bit about agency-wide, what we're doing in 2019 after a successful 2018. In 2019, we were going to focus on tying staff management performance to project delivery. So we have delivery metrics that will appear in annual staff performance objectives this year. Secondly, the bid environment, we're very focused on making sure we improve our coordination with regional partners on both sides of the river to make sure that when we let contracts, we're doing it in the context of knowing what the volume of projects are out in those specific areas. Thirdly, we're going to improve our property acquisitions, which requires stakeholder coordination. Fourth, we're going to focus on contractor performance by implementing our contractor performance policy. And fifth, we'll continue with our successful effort around, I call it the CompStat process, where we have very detailed performance evaluation meetings each month with our line departments and look at progress that we're making and where we need to troubleshoot. And that's a joint effort between Jim Strace, his team, and mine. So with that, I conclude my remarks. Take any questions.
Thank you, Derek. I want to commend you and your colleagues for a very solid performance 2018. Keep up the good work. This report was for information only. No vote is required. Thank you once again. This concludes today's meeting of the Committee on Capital Planning, Execution, and Asset Management. I turn it back to our chairman.